I never expected that my teammate missing curfew would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It all started with a quiet knock and a desperate whisper on the other side of my door, a single moment that unraveled the neat, orderly, and lonely world I had built for myself. It's funny how the biggest shifts in our lives rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with trumpets and ceremony. They slip in through the cracks of a normal Tuesday night, disguised as a minor inconvenience. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was a sophomore in college, trying to balance a full course load with my spot on the university's basketball team. My life ran on a predictable schedule: morning classes, afternoon practice, evening study sessions in the library, and then back to my single dorm room for a few hours of quiet before doing it all again. I was good at basketball, a reliable shooting guard, but I wasn't a star. I was the guy who did the work, who showed up on time, and who never caused any trouble. I kept my head down, both on the court and off it. My routine was my armor. It kept me focused, and it kept me safe, insulating me from the messier parts of college life. It also kept me separate. While my teammates were out at parties or cramming together in chaotic study groups, I was usually alone. It wasn't that I didn't like them. I just didn't quite know how to fit in. I was quiet, observant, and I carried a secret that felt like a wall between me and everyone else, especially in a world as aggressively masculine as college athletics. And then there was Caleb. Caleb was everything I wasn't. He was the team's star forward, the one whose natural charisma drew people in. He played with a fluid, almost joyful confidence that I could only ever imitate. He had a smile that could disarm a drill sergeant and a laugh that echoed through the locker room. From my quiet corner, I watched him, cataloging the small details that probably no one else noticed. The way he'd run a hand through his dark, messy hair when he was frustrated by a play. The slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes when he was genuinely amused. The focused intensity in his gaze right before he took a crucial free throw. To me, he was like a figure from a different world. He was popular, outgoing, and, as far as I knew, completely straight. Girls flocked to him after games, and he was always gracious, always smiling. He existed on a social plane I couldn't reach, and my attraction to him was a hopeless, silent thing I kept locked away. It was just a fact of my life, like the smell of worn leather from my basketball or the constant hum of the ventilation in my dorm. It was there, but it was pointless to engage with. He was a teammate, a friendly acquaintance, and that was all we would ever be. That was the rule I had set for myself, another part of my armor. Our interactions were pleasant but superficial. We'd exchange a "hey, man, good practice" in the locker room or a nod across the dining hall. We weren't friends, not really. We were just two people whose lives ran on parallel tracks, occasionally intersecting at the gym. I was fine with that. Or at least, I had convinced myself I was. It was safer that way. Keeping that distance meant I couldn't get hurt, couldn't have my quiet world disrupted. I had everything under control. But control is a funny thing, isn't it? You think you have a firm grip on it, until life sends a small, unexpected tremor, and everything you thought was solid ground begins to shift beneath your feet. For me, that tremor came on a cold Tuesday night, just before midnight. It started with a sound so soft I almost missed it, a gentle tap-tap-tap on my dorm room door. It was a little after 11:30. Curfew for athletes living in the dorms was midnight on weeknights, a rule our coach, a stern man named Mr. Peterson, enforced with military precision. I was already in for the night, sitting at my desk, trying to make sense of a dense chapter on economic theory. The campus outside was quiet, the usual weeknight lull having settled over the buildings. I wasn't expecting anyone. My door was a boundary to my small sanctuary, and it was rare for anyone to cross it uninvited. The knock came again, a little more insistent this time, but still cautious. It wasn't the loud, confident banging of a drunk friend. It was hesitant, almost secretive. I frowned, pushing my chair back. My first thought was that it was the resident advisor doing late-night rounds, but that didn't make sense. They usually just patrolled the halls. Curiosity mingled with a touch of annoyance. I got up and walked to the door, my socked feet silent on the cold linoleum floor. I didn't bother looking through the peephole. I just turned the lock and opened the door a few inches, peering into the dimly lit hallway. And that's when my carefully controlled world tilted on its axis. It was Caleb. He was standing there, his shoulders hunched against the chill of the corridor. He wasn't smiling his usual easy smile. His face was etched with anxiety, his eyes wide and pleading. He was still in his street clothes, jeans, and a thin hoodie, and he was clutching the strap of his backpack like a lifeline. "Lucas," he whispered, his voice urgent and low. He glanced nervously down the empty hall before looking back at me. "Hey, sorry to bother you, man." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a restless energy about him that was completely at odds with his usual calm demeanor on the court. I just stood there, speechless for a second, my mind racing to catch up. Why was he at my door? His room was on the floor above, with his roommate, another player from the team. "Caleb? What's going on?" I finally managed to ask, my own voice a confused whisper. He took a half step closer, his expression growing more desperate. "Look, I know this is random, but can you let me in? Please." He spoke the words in a rush, as if afraid someone would overhear. "I missed curfew. My roommate, Rick, he's a total narc. He'll tell Coach for sure if I try to sneak in now. Coach will have my hide." My brain processed the situation. Getting caught breaking curfew meant running extra laps for a week, maybe even getting benched for the next game. For Caleb, the team's star, that was a huge deal. But helping him meant I was taking a risk, too. If we were caught, I'd be in just as much trouble for harboring a fugitive, so to speak. My instinct for self-preservation, the one that had guided me for so long, screamed at me to close the door and pretend this never happened. But then I looked at him, really looked at him. The panic in his eyes was genuine. This wasn't the confident star player I saw on the court. This was just a guy in trouble, asking for help. And he had come to me. Not to one of his closer friends, but to me. For a reason I couldn't comprehend, he had chosen my door. That fact alone was enough to silence the cautious voice in my head. Without another word, I pulled the door open wider. "Get in," I said, stepping back to let him pass. Relief washed over his face so completely it was like watching a light switch on. He slipped inside, and I quickly and quietly closed the door, turning the deadbolt with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the small room, sealing our conspiracy. He stood in the middle of my floor, his backpack still slung over his shoulder, looking around my small, neat space as if he'd just entered another dimension. The silence between us was thick with unspoken questions. My predictable, orderly night was officially over. He let out a long, slow breath, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said, his voice returning to its normal volume. "Seriously, man, you're a lifesaver." He finally dropped his backpack to the floor with a heavy thud. "It's no problem," I replied, the words feeling inadequate. I gestured vaguely towards my room. Make yourself at home." I guess my room was small, dominated by a single bed, a desk, a bookshelf, and a small armchair crammed into the corner. It was a sterile, functional space, and suddenly I was acutely aware of how little personality it had. It was a room that screamed, "I am alone a lot." Caleb didn't seem to notice or care. He was just grateful to be out of the hallway. He ran a hand through his hair, the familiar gesture now seeming less like frustration and more like pure exhaustion. I lost track of time. I was over at the art building, working on a project for my sculpture class, and my phone died. By the time I realized the time, it was already past 11-inch. My mind snagged on one detail. "Sculpture class?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise out of my voice. I had him pegged as a business or communications major, something practical that fit his job persona. Art didn't fit the image I had constructed of him at all. He gave a small, almost shy smile. "Yeah, it's my minor. Don't tell the guys, though. They'd probably think it's weird." He looked at me, a question in his eyes, as if gauging my reaction. "I won't," I said quickly. "I think that's cool, and I meant it." It was more than cool, it was fascinating. It was a crack in the facade of the Caleb I thought I knew, revealing something unexpected and infinitely more interesting underneath. It was the first time I felt like I was seeing a piece of the real person, not just the campus celebrity. We stood there in an awkward silence for a moment before I remembered my duties as a host, however reluctant. "You can, take the bed," I offered. "I can sleep in the chair or on the floor." He immediately shook his head. "No way, man. It's your room. I'm the one who messed up. I'll take the floor. I can sleep anywhere." Before I could protest, he was already shrugging off his hoodie. I grabbed the extra blanket and pillow I kept in my closet for cold nights and tossed them to him. He arranged them on the small patch of carpet between my desk and the door, creating a makeshift bed. As we settled in for the night, the lights off, the only illumination coming from the sliver of moonlight filtering through the window, the strangeness of the situation really hit me. Caleb, the guy I had admired from a safe distance for over a year, was sleeping on my floor just a few feet away. His quiet breathing was a steady rhythm in the dark, a tangible presence that made my small room feel both smaller and infinitely larger at the same time. "Hey, Lucas." His voice came softly from the darkness. "Yeah," I answered, my heart giving a little jump. "Thanks again. Really. I mean it." There was a sincerity in his tone that went beyond simple gratitude. It felt different, warmer. "Don't worry about it," I said, staring up at my ceiling. "Get some sleep." We didn't talk more after that, but I lay awake for a long time, listening to him breathe. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The secret I had guarded so carefully felt dangerously close to the surface. Hope, a feeling I had learned to suppress, was beginning to stir in my chest, a fragile, tentative thing. This was just one night, I told myself. It was a fluke, an emergency. Tomorrow, everything would go back to normal. He would go back to his world, and I would go back to mine. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, a small, treacherous part of me didn't want it to. The next morning, everything felt different. Waking up to the reality of another person in my room was jarring. Caleb was already awake, sitting up and leaning against the leg of my desk, scrolling through his newly charged phone. The early morning light cast long shadows across the floor, and the room was still and quiet. He looked up as I shifted, a small, sleepy smile on his face. "Morning," he mumbled. "Morning," I replied, my voice thick with sleep. The awkwardness from the night before had vanished, replaced by a strange sense of domesticity. It felt normal, too normal. We got ready in a quiet, coordinated dance, trying to stay out of each other's way in the cramped space. He left before the RA could do morning rounds, slipping out with another quiet thank you and a promise to buy me coffee as repayment. I thought that would be the end of it. I had done him a favor, he was grateful, and now our parallel lives would resume their usual distance. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A few days later, he found me in the library, a place I considered my personal fortress of solitude. He didn't just wave or nod. He walked right up to my table and dropped 2 cups of coffee onto it. "I told you I owed you one," he said, sliding into the chair opposite me. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and his presence seemed to fill the quiet space. "Also, I was wondering if you could help me with something." My heart did a familiar nervous flutter. "Sure, what's up?" "Econ," he said, grimacing. "I'm drowning in it. I heard from one of the guys you're basically a genius at it. Think you could, tutor me? Just for the upcoming midterm." This was the moment everything changed course. Helping him hide was one thing. It was a single, contained event. This was an invitation for sustained contact, for scheduled time together. The cautious part of my brain was waving a giant red flag. This was dangerous territory. It meant letting him into my life, my space, on a regular basis. But the hopeful part, the part that had been awakened by the sound of his breathing on my floor, was already saying yes. "Yeah, of course," I heard myself say, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. "We can meet here, or in my room if it's quieter." "Your room would be great," he said, his smile widening. "The library is a little too quiet. Makes me feel like I have to whisper my dumb questions." And so it began. Twice a week, Caleb would come to my room. We'd spread our books out on my small desk and on the floor. I'd try to explain concepts like supply and demand and marginal utility, and he would listen with a focused intensity that surprised me. He wasn't a slacker. He was just genuinely struggling with the material. He'd ask questions, fill pages with notes, and occasionally groan in frustration, running his hand through his hair in that way I knew so well. During these sessions, the walls I had so carefully constructed around myself started to crumble, brick by brick. We talked about more than just economics. He'd tell me about his sculpture class, showing me pictures on his phone of a piece he was working on, an abstract figure carved from a block of wood that was surprisingly beautiful and complex. He talked about his family back home, his younger sister he adored, his dream of maybe opening his own gallery one day, a dream he admitted to no one else. In return, I found myself opening up in ways I never had before. I told him about my love for old movies, my quiet ambition to be a writer. I even, hesitatingly, told him why I always seemed to be studying. I wasn't a genius. I was just terrified of failing, of not being good enough. He didn't laugh or dismiss it. He just nodded, his expression serious and understanding. I get that, he said quietly. I feel that way on the court sometimes. Like if I miss one shot, everyone's going to decide I'm a fraud. It was in these moments of shared vulnerability that my feelings for him deepened from a distant, impossible crush into something real and grounded. I was no longer just attracted to the charismatic basketball star. I was falling for Caleb, the guy who struggled with economics, who loved his sister, and who carved beautiful things out of wood in secret. One evening, we were studying for his midterm, which was the next day. We'd been at it for hours, the room filled with the scent of stale coffee and the low murmur of my voice explaining graphs. We were both exhausted. I was sitting at my desk, and he was on the floor, leaning back against the side of my bed, his textbook open in his lap. I was explaining a particularly tricky concept when I noticed the silence. I looked down from my book and saw that his head had drooped, his eyes closed. He was fast asleep. A soft smile touched my lips. I should have woken him up, told him to go back to his own room. It was late, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. He looked so peaceful, so unguarded. Carefully, so as not to disturb him, I saved my work and shut down my laptop. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heater. I stood up and stretched, my own body aching with fatigue. I looked down at him, a mess of dark hair and long limbs, completely at ease in my space. And in that moment, my room finally felt like a home. It was a small, perfect moment of peace, and I wanted to preserve it for as long as I could. That night led to the turning point, the moment that shifted everything from a quiet possibility into a charged reality. After our long study session, I hadn't had the heart to wake Caleb. He had looked so utterly exhausted, slumped against my bed, that I just let him be. I ended up dozing off in my desk chair, my neck stiff and my back aching when I woke up a few hours later. The first thing I saw in the pre-dawn gloom was him, still asleep on the floor. I decided to move to my bed, figuring I could get at least an hour or two of real sleep. I was so tired I barely registered anything, just pulling the covers over myself and sinking into the mattress. What happened next felt like something out of a dream. Sometime in that hazy space between sleep and waking, I felt a shift, a weight settling onto the bed beside me. My eyes fluttered open. Caleb had moved from the floor to my bed, but he hadn't just taken the other side. He was curled up, his back to me, clearly still mostly asleep and just seeking a more comfortable surface than the hard floor. My bed wasn't large, and the space between us was negligible. My entire body went rigid. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. This was too much. Too close. My mind was screaming at me to move, to put some distance between us, to restore the safe boundary that had just been obliterated. But my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen, caught between sheer terror and a profound, aching longing. Then, he shifted again in his sleep. He rolled onto his back, and then slightly towards me, his arm draping loosely across my chest. His head came to rest in the hollow of my shoulder, his soft breathing warming my neck. And that was it. My brain just short-circuited. Every defense mechanism I had went offline. There was no more analyzing, no more fear, just the stunning, overwhelming reality of his closeness. He felt solid and warm against me. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. His hair tickled my chin. It was the most intimate I had ever been with another person, and it was completely, terrifyingly innocent. He was asleep. He had no idea what he was doing, no idea of the storm he was creating inside of me. I lay there, hardly daring to breathe, my body tense but my heart filled with a strange, fragile peace. For a few stolen minutes, in the silent darkness of my dorm room, I allowed myself to pretend. I pretended this wasn't an accident. I pretended it was real. I pretended this was something that could happen again, that he was here because he wanted to be. I closed my eyes, committing every sensation to memory, the weight of his arm, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his body next to mine. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, and it was a complete illusion. Or so I thought. Eventually, my own exhaustion won out over the turmoil in my mind, and I drifted back to sleep. When I woke up again, bright sunlight was streaming through the window, and I was alone in my bed. For a frantic second, I thought I had imagined the whole thing. But then I saw a folded piece of paper on my desk. I got up and picked it up, my hands trembling slightly. It was a note, written in Caleb's messy, slanted handwriting. It said, "Thanks for everything, Lucas. I think I'm actually going to pass this thing. See you at practice." There was no mention of him moving to my bed. No acknowledgement of the shared intimacy. It was a simple, friendly note. And it broke my heart a little. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. The easy camaraderie we had built during our study sessions evaporated overnight, replaced by a thick, unspoken tension. It was like we had both tacitly agreed to pretend that night had never happened, but the memory of it hung in the air between us every time we interacted. At practice, he avoided my eyes. In the locker room, our conversations reverted back to the safe, superficial "hey, man," and "good game" of before. He stopped coming to my room. He passed his econ midterm, he told me in the dining hall, with a quick, grateful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and that was it. The excuse for our proximity was gone. We were back on our parallel tracks. Only now I was excruciatingly aware of the space between us. My mind became a relentless courtroom where I was both prosecutor and defendant. I replayed the moment in the dark over and over again. He was just asleep, my rational side argued. It meant nothing. He was just seeking comfort, like a kid. He probably woke up, realized where he was, felt awkward, and now he's trying to spare us both the embarrassment by ignoring it. It was the most logical explanation. But the hopeful, traitorous part of me couldn't let it go. What if it wasn't an accident? What if some subconscious part of him knew exactly what he was doing? The way he'd been so open with me, sharing things he told no one else. The way he looked at me sometimes during our study sessions, a lingering gaze that I had tried to dismiss as simple concentration. Had I imagined it all? Was I just projecting my own feelings onto him, seeing what I desperately wanted to see? This internal debate was exhausting. I became withdrawn, even more so than before. I felt raw and exposed, as if my secret was written all over my face for everyone to see. I felt a profound sense of loss for something I never even had. The friendship, the easy connection we had built, was gone, and I didn't know how to get it back. I was terrified I had made him uncomfortable, that my feelings had somehow seeped out and scared him away. The thought that I might have ruined things was a constant, heavy weight in my chest. The silence between us stretched for over a week. It was a loud silence, full of things unsaid. We were teammates, so we couldn't avoid each other completely, but we managed to exist in the same spaces without ever truly connecting. Every brief, stilted interaction was a fresh reminder of what I had lost. I had allowed myself a moment of hope, and now I was paying the price. The armor I had worn for so long was back in place, but it felt different now. Before, it had been for protection. Now, it felt like a prison. I had tasted a different kind of life, a life of connection and vulnerability, and being forced back into my solitary world was more painful than I ever could have imagined. I was back to being alone, but for the first time, I truly felt lonely. The tension stretched until it felt like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap at any moment. I had resigned myself to this new, awkward reality. I decided it was for the best. I would get over it. We would eventually fall back into a rhythm of distant politeness, and the memory of that night would fade. I just had to be patient and disciplined, like I was with everything else in my life. But Caleb, it turned out, had other plans. It happened after a tough practice. We had lost our last game, and Coach Peterson was running us through grueling drills. By the end, everyone was exhausted, irritable, and covered in sweat. I was heading out of the locker room, my gym bag slung over my shoulder, eager to get back to my room and just disappear for a while. "Lucas, wait up." The voice stopped me in my tracks. It was Caleb. I turned around slowly, my stomach twisting into a knot. He was standing by the lockers, looking just as tired as I felt, but his expression was determined. He gestured with his head towards the empty gym. "Can we talk for a minute?" My first instinct was to say no, to make an excuse about having too much homework. The thought of having a direct conversation with him, of addressing the giant elephant that had been living between us, was terrifying. But I was also tired of the silence, tired of the anxiety. I gave a tight, barely perceptible nod. We walked back out onto the court, the vast, empty space amplifying the sound of our footsteps. The smell of floor wax and old sweat hung in the air. He didn't speak right away. He just walked to the free throw line and stood there for a moment, staring at the hoop as if gathering his thoughts. I stood a few feet away, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, waiting. Finally, he turned to face me. His eyes were serious, stripped of their usual easygoing light. "Look, man," he started, his voice low. "I know things have been weird between us this past week." "It's fine," I said automatically, the defensive words jumping out before I could stop them. "We've been busy." He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. "No, it's not fine. And it's my fault." He took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into cold water. "The other night, when I fell asleep in your room. I need to be straight with you about that." He paused, and my heart felt like it stopped beating. This was it. The moment he would say it was a mistake, that he was sorry if he gave me the wrong idea, the gentle, brutal letdown I had been bracing myself for. "When I woke up," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "and I was next to you. It wasn't an accident. I mean, falling asleep was, but moving from the floor. I don't know. I was half asleep, but it felt right. To be there." He stumbled over the words, his usual eloquence gone, replaced by a raw, uncertain honesty. And it scared the hell out of me. I just stared at him, my mind unable to process what he was saying. It wasn't the speech I had prepared for. It wasn't the rejection I had anticipated. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since then," he went on, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "About why I came to your door that night. My roommate Rick is annoying. Yeah, but I have other friends in the dorm. I could have gone to any of them. But I didn't. I came to you." He took a step closer to me. The space between us shrank. And our study sessions, they were the best part of my day. And it wasn't because I suddenly developed a passion for macroeconomics. He let out a shaky laugh. "I like being around you, Lucas, more than I like being around anyone else. And when I woke up next to you, I realized why. It's not just a friendship thing for me." He stopped, his eyes searching mine, vulnerable and wide open. "I don't know what this means, or what I'm doing, really. This is all new territory for me. But I know I miss talking to you. And I hate this silence between us." My own throat felt tight, clogged with all the words I had swallowed for over a year. I was stunned into silence, not by shock, but by the overwhelming wave of relief and recognition. He was putting words to feelings I thought I was experiencing alone. He was describing my world. "I thought I made you uncomfortable." I finally managed to whisper, the words feeling fragile in the vast space of the gym. "I thought you felt trapped." "No," he said, shaking his head vehemently. "Never. I was the one who was a coward. I felt something I didn't understand, and I ran from it. I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry I hurt you." "You didn't know," I said, finding my voice. "How could you?" "Maybe I did," he said softly. "Maybe I've known for a while. I just didn't have the words for it." He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He was so close now I could see the flecks of green in his hazel eyes. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently resting on my arm. His touch was electric, sending a jolt of warmth through my entire body. "I don't want there to be any more silence," he said. And then, he leaned in and he kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was firm and sure, a kiss of statement and relief. It was a kiss that said everything we hadn't been able to say for weeks. All the anxiety, the fear, the loneliness I had been carrying around, it all just melted away in that one moment. I kissed him back, my hands coming up to cup his face, my fingers tangling in his messy hair. It felt like coming home. It felt like I could finally breathe again. When we finally broke apart, we just stood there for a moment, foreheads resting against each other, breathing the same air. "So," he said, a genuine, dazzling smile finally returning to his face. "Does this mean you'll help me with my sculpture project?" I laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh that echoed through the empty gym. "Yeah," I said, my own smile feeling wider than my face. "Yeah, I think I can do that." The weeks that followed our conversation in the gym felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of vibrant color. The change wasn't dramatic to the outside observer. We were still Lucas and Caleb, teammates, students. But between us, everything was different. The unspoken tension was replaced by an unspoken understanding. a quiet current of affection that flowed beneath every interaction. Our study sessions resumed, but now they were interspersed with long talks that had nothing to do with academics. We'd sit in my room, our books forgotten, and just exist in each other's space. Sometimes he would sketch ideas for his sculptures in a notebook while I wrote, the only sounds being the scratch of his charcoal and the tap of my keys. It was a comfortable, easy silence, the kind I had only ever dreamed of sharing with someone. He took me to the art building one afternoon, after all the classes were done for the day. The studio smelled of clay and turpentine and sawdust, a scent I immediately associated with him. He showed me the piece he had been working on the night he missed curfew. It was the abstract wooden figure, now sanded and polished to a warm glow. It was beautiful, full of motion and feeling. I didn't know what it was about when I started, he said, running his hand over the smooth wood. But now I think I do. I think it's about breaking free of something. He looked at me, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the sculpture. We started to build a life together in the small moments. Grabbing coffee between classes, walking back from late practices together, sharing a pair of headphones to listen to a new album one of us liked. He'd leave a stupid doodle on a napkin for me to find in the dining hall. I'd save him a seat in the library. They were small, simple gestures, but they were anchors in my day, constant, reassuring reminders that I wasn't alone anymore. My world, once so small and self-contained, had expanded to include him, and everything felt brighter because of it. One evening, about a month later, we were in my room. It was raining outside, a steady drumming against the window pane that made the small space feel even cozier. We were lying on my bed, side by side on our backs, just staring at the ceiling. It was a comfortable quiet, the air thick with contentment. He turned his head to look at me. "You know," he said softly, "I'm glad my phone died that night." I smiled, turning to face him. "You're glad you almost got benched for an entire season." "Okay, maybe not glad about that part," he conceded with a laugh. "But I'm glad I had to come here. I think if I hadn't been forced into it, I might have stayed scared for a lot longer." He reached out and laced his fingers through mine, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "It's funny. I spent all this time building up this idea of who I was supposed to be, the star player, the popular guy. It took getting locked out of my own life for a night to realize I didn't actually want to be that person. Not if it meant I couldn't have this." His grip on my hand tightened. And in that moment, I understood completely. My routine, my rules, my emotional armor. It had all been my own version of a locked door. I thought it was keeping me safe, but it was really just keeping me out. Out of my own life, out of the possibility of connection. It took a quiet knock and a whispered plea to make me open it. It took letting someone else in to finally let myself out. Love doesn't always announce itself with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it's a quiet visitor you almost don't let in. Sometimes, you just have to be brave enough to turn the lock.